Hello everyone, here is Afra Siab. Today we are going to solve Cambridge IGCSE Physics Paper 4 Theory Extended, held on October-November 2017, and paper code is 0625 with variant 42. So let's start from question number 1. Question number 1. Figure 1.1 shows a cylinder made from copper of density 9000 kg per meter cube. In figure 1.1 we can see that there is a cylinder and its density is given, that is 9000 kg per meter cube. The volume of the cylinder is 75 centimeter cube. Part A. Calculate the mass of the cylinder. So the volume of this cylinder also be given, which is equal to 75 centimeter cube, and we have to find out the mass of the cylinder. So first of all, I write here formula that density is equal to mass per unit volume. From here we have to find out mass. So mass will be equal to product of density and volume of the cylinder. So first of all, I write here volume is given 75 centimeter cube, and we have to convert this into meter cube. So I write here 75 multiplied by 10 की power minus 6 meter cube. Now I am going to put values. So mass will be equal to density is 9000 multiplied by volume is 75 into 10 की power minus 6. So the value of mass will be equal to 0.68 kilogram. So it's the value of the mass of the cylinder. So I write here mass is equal to 0.68 kilogram. Part B. The gravitational field strength is 10 Newton per kilogram. Part 1. Calculate the weight of the cylinder. Here we have to find out the weight of cylinder when the gravitational field strength is given. So first of all, we know that weight is the product of mass and gravitational field strength. I write here weight is equal to mass multiplied by gravitational field strength in symbolic form. I write W is equal to M cross G, mass that we already calculate in part A, which is equal to 0.68. So I write here 0.68 multiplied by the value of G is 10 Newton per kilogram. So that the value of weight comes to be 6.8 Newton. So weight is equal to 6.8 Newton. Next, part 2. State one way in which weight differs from mass. So here we have to differentiate the weight and mass. So weight is a vector quantity while mass is a scalar quantity, or we can simply say that weight has direction while the mass does not have any direction. So I write here weight is a vector quantity whereas mass is a scalar quantity. Going towards the next part. Part C. Figure 1.2 shows the cylinder immersed in a liquid. So first of all, in figure 1.2 we can see that there is a liquid, and inside this we place a cylinder and it is totally immersed in the liquid. The upper face of the cylinder is at depth 2.7 centimeter below the surface of the liquid. The pressure due to the liquid at the upper surface of the cylinder is 560 Pascal. Part 1. Calculate the density of liquid. So here we have to find out the density. First of all, I write here pressure is equal to rho GH, where rho is density, G is gravitational field strength and H is depth. Here we have to find out the value of density. It will be equal to pressure over G and H. So pressure is given, that is 560 Pascal, divided by the value of G is 10 multiplied by height or depth. So it is given that depth is 2.7 centimeter. But we have to convert this into meters. So I just write here 2.7 divided by 100. It will be equal to 0.027 meter. So I multiply here 0.027, so that the value of density comes to be 2.1 into 10 की power 3 kilogram per meter cube. So I write here density is equal to 2.1 into 10 की power 3 kilogram over meter cube. Part 2. Explain why the cylinder does not float in the liquid. So here we have to explain that why the cylinder does not float in a liquid. It is due to the reason that the weight of this cylinder is acting in downward direction and there is also the upthrust due to the liquid. The value of this weight is greater than the upthrust due to the liquid. So that's why the cylinder does not float. I write here weight of cylinder is greater than the upthrust due to liquid. So that's why cylinder does not float in this liquid. Question number 2, part A. An object is moving in a straight line at constant speed. A resultant force begins to act upon the object. State the ways in which the force may change the motion of the object. Here we have to explain that in which ways the force can change the motion of object. So first of all, if I consider here is the object and force is acting on this object, then this force may accelerate or decelerate this object. It means that the acceleration produced here, but this acceleration may be positive or negative. So we can simply say that when the force acts on a body, the body accelerates. So first point I write here, to accelerate or decelerate an object. So when the acceleration of the object changes, then according to the definition of acceleration, that is change in velocity over time, so there will be the change in speed of the moving object. So we can simply say that when a force acts on a body, the speed of the moving object changes. So I write here force changes the speed of moving object Part B. State one other effect a force could have on the object. So here we have to describe another effect a force have on the object. So when a force acts on a body, it may changes its shape or size. So I write here force change the shape or size of object. Next part, C. The mass of the car is 1400 kilogram. The car initially at rest is moved along a level road by the resultant force of 3500 Newton. The car reaches a speed of 30 meter per second. Part 1. Calculate the average acceleration of the car. So first of all here, I consider that here is a car whose mass is 1400 kilogram. But this car initially at rest means that its initial velocity is equal to 0. Then it moves and the resultant force on it is 3500 Newton. Then the speed of the car changes and it becomes 30 meter per second. We have to find out the average acceleration. So according to Newton's second law of motion, F is equal to ma. Here we have to find out the value of acceleration. It will be equal to F over m. So I am going to put values here. Acceleration will be equal to force, that is given here 3500 Newton, divided by mass, that is 1400. So that the value of acceleration comes to be 2.5 meter per second square. So I write here acceleration is equal to 2.5 meter per second square. Next part 2. Calculate the time for which force is applied. Here we have to calculate the value of time. So I write here the definition of acceleration A is equal to delta V over T, where delta V is change in speed over time. I also write it as final speed minus initial speed over time. From here we have to find out the value of t. It will be equal to v minus u over a. So I am going to put values here. Time will be equal to final velocity is given 30 meter per second minus initial velocity is 0 because car is initially at rest, and acceleration that we already calculate in first part, it is 2.5 meter per second square. So that the value of time comes to be 12 seconds. I write here time is equal to 12 seconds. State the name of the force which opposes the motion of car. Here we have to tell the name of the force that opposes the motion of car. So this force is basically frictional force or air resistance. I write here or air resistance. Question number 3, part A. State the name of a fuel that is burned to produce large amount of electrical energy. Describe a process by which the electrical energy is obtained from the chemical energy stored in this fuel. First of all, here is the name of fuel and second description of the process. So the fuel that is burned to produce large amount of electrical energy is gas, oil or coal. So I write here fuel is gas, oil or coal. And all of these are used to produce a large amount of electrical energy, by which process we get the electrical energy from the chemical energy. So first of all of these fuel burn and they produce the thermal energy. This thermal energy is used to produce steam and the steam rotates the turbine. Turbine is used to drive the generator which produce electricity. So in this way we use the gas, oil or coal to get electrical energy. So I write here thermal energy is obtained by burning of coal, oil or gas. Heat energy is used to produce steam. So the steam rotates the turbine and turbine is used to drive generator. That produces electricity. So in this way we get electrical energy from the fuel like gas, oil or coal. Going towards the next part B, explain why the sun is the source of energy stored in the fuel in part first. So here we have to explain that why the sun is the source of energy. So first of all, the chemical energy stored in the plants or animals million years ago, and this energy is stored due to the sun. All the underground plants and animals are a main source of this fuel. Today even sun is the main source of energy for the plants and living things to grow. So I write here the chemical energy stored in plants or animals millions years ago due to sun. All underground plants and animals are main reason for this fuel. Today even sun is the main source of energy for plants and living things to grow. Next, part C. Explain whether the process in part A is renewable. So, renewable is a process that can be used again and again to generate electrical energy. So, first of all, the underground fuel is not renewable as it is being consumed fastly and the reserves may last around 50 years. So, I write here it's non-renewable. The underground fuel is non-renewable as it is being consumed fastly. The reserves may last around 50 years. So that's why it's non-renewable source of energy. Question number 4. A beaker contains water at room temperature. Figure 4.1 shows the beaker placed on a tripod above a Bunsen burner. So here is a figure 4.1 and a beaker that is contained water is placed over the Bunsen burner. The Bunsen burner is lit and the temperature of water begins to increase. Part A. The water is evaporating. Part 1. Describe one difference between evaporation and boiling. So here we have to differentiate the evaporation and boiling. So evaporation takes place at any temperature while the boiling takes place at a specific temperature. It is the main difference between evaporation and boiling. So I write here evaporation takes place at any temperature while boiling takes place at specific temperature. Part 2. State and explain what happens to the rate at which the water evaporates as its temperature increases. So here we have to explain the effect that when we increase the temperature, so what will be the effect on the rate of evaporation. So when we increase the temperature, if I consider that here is container and water molecules like that, here that is shown in this figure. So when I increase the temperature, then what will happen? The water bonds breaks and molecules gain energy. More molecules have enough energy to evaporate, so the rate of evaporation increase by increasing temperature. So I write here rate of evaporation increases because at high temperature water bonds break and more molecules have enough energy to escape. So when more molecules have enough energy to escape and they escape from the surface, so the rate of evaporation increases. Going towards the next part, part B. After a few minutes, the water reaches its boiling point temperature. So the boiling point of water is 100 degrees C. After few minutes, the temperature of water becomes 100 degrees C. The water continues to gain energy from the Bunsen burner. Part 1. State what happened to the temperature of water in the beaker. So, there will be no effect on the temperature of water in the beaker because it reaches its boiling point. So, after that, temperature does not change. So, right here, temperature remains same. Part 2. The specific latent heat of vaporization of water is 2.3 into 10 to the power 6 joule per kilogram. After the water reaches its boiling point, it takes 12 minutes for 0.095 kilogram of water to boil away. Calculate the average rate at which energy is being supplied to the water by heating. So here we have to find out the average rate at which energy is being supplied. It means that here we have to calculate energy rate, which is also known as power. In simple words, here we have to calculate the power. So I write here the formula of power: rate of energy supplied, energy over time. But here we don't know the value of energy. So first of all, we have to find out the value of energy and then we can easily calculate power. So I write here energy is equal to mass and specific latent heat of vaporization L. So when I put values here, energy will be equal to mass is given 0.095 multiplied by the value of L is 2.3 into 10 to the power 6. So this is the value of energy in joules. I use this value to calculate power. So I write here power is equal to energy over time. So energy is equal to 0.095 into 2.3 multiplied by 10 to the power 6 divided by time, where time is given 12 minutes, but we have to convert this time into seconds, so I multiply it 60. So the value of power comes to be 300 watt. The unit of power is watt. So the rate of energy supplied will be equal to 300 watt. Question number 5, part A. Explain why houses in hot countries are often painted white. Use ideas about the transfer of thermal energy in your answer. So here we have to explain that why the houses in the hot countries are painted white. So infrared radiation comes from the sun because sun is the major source of energy. So most of the energy comes from the sun in the form of infrared radiation. And we know that white surfaces are good reflector. It reflects most of the radiation falling on it. So we can simply say that white surfaces absorb less energy and reflect more. As the white surfaces cannot absorb much heat, so it keeps the house cooler, and in this way the energy, that is heat energy or thermal energy, cannot be transferred from sun to the building. As a result, the temperature of the building remains low. So I write here infrared radiation comes from sun white surfaces absorb less energy and reflect maximum energy. Because white surfaces are good reflector. As white surfaces cannot absorb much heat, so it keeps the house cooler. Heat energy cannot be transferred from sun to buildings. Part B. As the star approaches the end of its life, the amount of radiation emitted from it per second changes. The star cools down. State any effect on the rate of emission of radiation. So first of all, I consider two objects. Here it is first object and it is second one. And now suppose that the temperature of first object is greater than the surrounding. So I simply write here T1 is greater than temperature of surrounding. And for the object 2, temperature of it is less than the temperature of surrounding. And we know that energy transfer from higher to lower concentration, or we can simply say that energy transfer from a temperature of high value to the temperature of low value. In the case of first object, the temperature of this object is larger as compared to surrounding. So this object emits heat to the surrounding because the temperature of the surrounding is less. But in the case of second object, the temperature of the object is small as compared to surrounding. It means that energy from the surrounding adds to the object. We can simply say that object absorb energy in this case. So the object that is at higher temperature emits most of the radiation, but the object that is at low temperature absorb most radiation. So here the star cools down, which means that its temperature decreases, its temperature is low. So what will happen to the rate of emission of radiation? It will decrease. So I write here the rate of emission of radiation from star decreases. And it decreases because the star cools down, its temperature is low. Question number 6. Figure 6.1 represents wave fronts of water wave on the surface of water approaching a gap in a barrier. So here is the figure 6.1. We can see that the wave fronts are approaching towards the barrier. Part A. The wavefronts to the right of the barrier spread out as far as the dashed line in figure 6.1. Part 1. State the name of the process of spreading out. So this is basically diffraction. The bending or spreading out of the wave as it passes to the obstacle. So I write here, this is diffraction. Part 2. Draw 4 wavefronts to the right of the barrier. So here we have to draw the wavefronts on the right side of the barrier. So first of all, we can see here that the wavefronts are going towards the barrier and the distance between two wavefronts is basically equal to wavelength. And the separation between these two barriers is, I suppose that it is d. So first of all, I measure the wavelength and separation. If the wavelength is smaller as compared to separation, then there will be less diffraction. I write here, lambda is less than d, there will be less diffraction. But if the wavelength is greater than the separation, then there will be greater diffraction. The amount of spreading or bending actually depends upon the separation of the barrier. If the separation is small, then the bending will be large. If the separation is large, the bending will be small. So here we have to compare the wavelength and the separation and use this, that if the wavelength is smaller than the separation, then there will be less bending. So if the wavelength is larger as compared to separation, the bending will be larger. Now I am going to draw the wavefronts on the right side of this barrier. There will be less bending. You have to consider this. Now I am going to draw this wavefront, and we also have to be very careful that the distance between the wavefront on the right hand side will be equal to the wavelength that is here. Now I draw here. So the distance between these two wavefronts is basically equal to wavelength. Part B. State the effect of increasing the width of the gap in the barrier. So when we increase the width of the gap, what will happen? So going back here, the gap is greater as compared to wavelength, so there will be less diffraction. I write here, the diffraction will be less. Part 2. State and explain the effect of decreasing the frequency of the water wave. Here, when we decrease the frequency of the water wave, what will be the effect? So first of all, I write here wave equation, that is V is equal to F lambda. Here, if I decrease the frequency, then what will be the effect on wavelength? So here, when I decrease the frequency, what will be the effect on wavelength? Because the speed remains same. So according to V is equal to F lambda, when speed is same, we can simply say that frequency is inversely proportional to wavelength. So by decreasing the frequency, the wavelength increases. So I write here, according to wave equation, which is V is equal to F lambda. By decreasing frequency, wavelength increases. So when we decrease the frequency, wavelength increases according to the wave equation. V is equal to F lambda, because speed in this case is constant. Question number 7, part A. Figure 7.1 is a diagram of converging lens used to produce an image of an object. Each point marked F is a principal focus. So here is the figure 7.1, and we can see that there are two focus, that is F on the left hand side of the converging lens and on the right hand side of the converging lens. There is also the object and the image of this object formed by the converging lens. Write down three terms that describe the image produced. So here we have to describe the three properties of the image. First of all, here I form the image and then I see whether this image is real or virtual, inverted or upright, or it is diminished or larger in size. So first of all, I use a ruler and draw the first line. First line is basically that passing through the focus point, and then it becomes parallel to the principal axis. So I draw its path. Now after refraction by this lens, it becomes parallel to principal axis. So this is the first ray. I also draw arrows here. Second ray is that passing through the center of lens and go straight. It is not deviated. So I draw its path. So this is second ray. Third ray is that First of all, it is parallel to the principal axis, and then by refraction length, it passes through the focus point. I also draw this ray. Now we have drawn all three rays. Now we see the properties of the image. First of all, we see the size of object and the size of image. Size of image is larger as compared to size of object. So this image is enlarged. Second thing is that this image is real as it is focused at a single point, and it can be projected on the screen. So it is real. And this image is also inverted because you can see here that the object is upward while the image is in downward direction. So it is also inverted. So these are the properties of the image. I write here real, inverted, and enlarged. Enlarged means the image size is larger as compared to the size of the object. Part B. Figure 7.2 shows a plane mirror, a point object O and observer's eye. So here is a figure 7.2. Here we can see that there is a plane mirror, and the second there is the object that is shown by O, and there is also the eye. Part first. On figure 7.2, draw two rays from the object reflected to the observer's eye. So here we have to draw the two rays, and it is reflected by the mirror and then it enters into the observer eye. Now I am going to draw the rays. First ray starts from the object O. I use a ruler and it falls on the mirror like this. And after reflection by the mirror, it enters into the person's eye. So I am going to draw it again here. So this is the path of the first ray. Second ray also starts from the object O, and after reflection by the mirror enters into the observer eye. Now I am going to draw the path for the second ray. And it is the complete path for the second ray. So we have completed our first part. Part 2. On figure 7.2, complete your drawing to determine the position of image of the object O. Label this image I. So we have to locate the position of the image and have to label it with I. So first of all, we can see here that these rays does not meet at a single point. It means that we have to extend them in backward direction and then locate the image. Now I again use the ruler and draw these rays in backward direction. I also have to trace the path for the first ray. It will be like that. The point where both of these rays intersect is actually the position of the image. Now I draw, here I place O, this is our image, and I place here I. I also draw arrow here. So it is our image I. We also have completed the second part. Question number 8. Figure 8.1 is a circuit diagram. Here is the figure 8.1 and we can see that the potential difference is 24 volt. There are 3 resistors. First of all, here is the resistor whose resistance is 8.0 ohm. Second one has resistance 4.0 ohms. Both of these are in series. And this series combination is in parallel with 6.0 ohm resistance. Calculate part A, the resistance of the circuit. Here we have to find out the total resistance of this circuit. So first of all, I write here, for the series circuit, the total resistance is obtained by adding the individual resistance. So here will be Rs is equal to, if I suppose it is R1, R2 and R3, it is equal to R1 plus R2 because both of these are in series and the total resistance in the series is obtained by adding all the resistances. So it will be 8.0 plus 4.0, that is 12 ohms. So this is basically the resistance of R1 and R2. I also draw a circuit here again. This is 12 ohm. And here it is 6.0 ohm. Now we can see that both of these resistance are in parallel. Now we have to find out the total resistance of this parallel combination. I write here 1 over R is equal to 1 over Rs plus 1 over R3 because it is Rs and here it is R3. So by using this formula I can find out the total resistance of the circuit. By putting values here, 1 over R is equal to 1 over 12 plus 1 over 6.0. It will be 12, 1.0 plus 2.0, that is 3.0 divided by 12. Here I write 1 over R is equal to 1 over 4.0. Now we have to find the value of R. So by cross multiplication, R will be equal to 4.0 ohm. So this is the resistance of the whole circuit. I write here, resistance is equal to 4.0 ohms. Part B, the potential difference across 8.0 ohm resistor. So here we have to find out the potential difference. First of all, I write here series and parallel combination. And here is potential difference and current. In the series combination, potential difference is change while current is same. But in parallel combination, potential difference is same while the current is different or change. Now here we have to find out the potential difference across 8.0 ohm resistance across this. For that we can see that this circuit, if I also connect battery here, so we can simply say that if the voltage across the battery is 24 volt, then the voltage across RS and R3 will be 24 volt because in the parallel combination the potential difference remains same. So I simply write here VRS is equal to 24 volt and VR3 is equal to 24 volt. Now this RS is basically this combination where R1 and R2 are connected in series, and we can see here that in the series combination the potential difference is changed but the current is same. It means that the potential across VR1 I write here and VR2, both of these are different. These are not same. And we have to find out the value across first resistor, that is 8.0 ohm. R1 is equal to 8.0 ohm. R2 is equal to 4.0 ohm. And the series combination of both of these will be equal to 12 ohm. Whereas the potential difference across this series combination is equal to 24 volt. Now first of all I find out the current, because you can see that in the parallel combination current is different. So I write here by using Ohm's law, V is equal to IR and I is equal to V over R. This V is basically across the series combination and it is also the resistance of series combination. So it will be 24 over 12, which is 2 ampere. So this 2 ampere is the current basically passing through 8.0 ohm resistance and 4.0 ohm resistance, because we can see here that in the series combination current is same. So in both of these resistors the value of current is same, but resistance of both are different. So using again Ohm law we can easily find out the potential difference. Again I write here V is equal to IR for R1 is equal to 8.0 ohm resistor. Here we have to find out the value of VR1, which is equal to IR1. So current across R1 is 2 ampere multiplied by its resistance is 8.0. So V of R1 is equal to 16 volt. So it means that across R1 potential is 16 volt. Now we also find out across R2 and check whether the total potential difference is equal to 24 volt or not. If it is equal to 24 volt, then our calculation is correct. So I write here V of R2 is equal to I R2. Current is again 2 ampere and its resistance is 4.0, which is equal to 8 volt. No. So we can see from here that in the series combination the potential difference is changed and it is basically equal to V of series is equal to VR1 plus VR2, because we have two resistance in series. I write here it is 24 volt. VR1 we calculate here it is 16 volt and VR2 is 8. So it will be 24 volt. Now we can see that the potential difference is same. It means that our calculation is correct. Now part B is that the potential difference across 8.0 ohm resistor, that is VR1. So we also have calculate VR1, it is equal to 16 volt. So the potential difference across 8.0 ohm resistor is 16 volt. Question number 9, part A. Figure 9.1 is a circuit diagram. So here is a figure 9.1 and we can see that there are three components A, B and C. The symbols of these components are shown. Part 1. State the name of the circuit component A, B and C. We have to tell the name of the components A, B and C. Going back to figure, we can see here that A is the symbol for resistor. I write here its resistor. B is for thermistor. And C is for LED, that is light emitting diode, because we can see here the arrow shows that light is emitting here. So it is basically LED. I write here component A is resistor, that is fixed resistor. Component B is thermistor. And C is LED, that is light emitting diode. Part 2. The circuit can be used to indicate a change in temperature. State and explain what would be observed when the temperature changes from hot to cold. So here we have to explain that when the temperature changes from hot to cold, what we observe here. So first of all, here is a circuit diagram in figure 9.1. If I say that the cooled voltage across the thermistor is high, that is across the thermistor, then the voltage of LED, that is input voltage, it will be high. In the case of high voltage, there will be the large current in the LED. So when there is large amount of current passing through light emitting diode, so it will lights up brightly. In the other case, when the hot voltage across thermistor is low, then in the case of low voltage, there will be low current, and when there is small amount of current, the LED does not light up, or we can simply say that it would light up but very dim. So I write here, if cold voltage across thermistor is high, so input voltage to LED is high, because you can see here it's the thermistor and it is connected directly with the LED. In case of high voltage, there is current in LED, due to which it lights up brightly. On the other hand, if hot voltage across thermistor is low, So in the case of low voltage, there is low current in LED. Therefore, it does not light up or would be very dim. Going towards the next part. Part B. Figure 9.2 shows our digital circuit. Here is a figure 9.2 and we can see that there are three inputs A, B and C. The input A and B combines by the AND gate, and here is the output of AND gate. The output of AND gate and the input C, both of these combine by OR gate to give the output X. Complete column X of the truth table for this circuit. Use the blank column for your working. So we have to complete this column. So first of all, here we can see that input A and B, C. All these inputs are given and we have to complete this truth table and write out the final output X. So first of all, I can see here input A and B are connected by AND gate. So first of all, A dot B, that is the output of AND gate. I calculate this and then I take the output this one and input C and apply OR gate over it. So first of all, in AND gate, if both of the inputs are high, output will be high. I write here, if both of the inputs are high, the output will be high. So I draw here a truth table for AND gate. Here is input A and B. Here is A and B. So first of all, I take input 0, 0, again 0, 1, 1, 0 and 1, 1. In the AND gate, when any one of the input is low, the output will be low. In the first case, here it is 0, 0. Both of the inputs are low, the output will be low. Second case is that first input is low while the second input is high. So, in the case of AND gate, if any one of the input is low, the output will be low. So, I write here 0. Third combination is 1, 0. Again, there is one low input. So, the output will be 0. Last one combination is 1, 1. Both of the inputs are high. The output will be high. So, I write here 1. I use this table and complete the truth table here. So first of all, here is 0, 0. Both of the inputs are low. So in the case of 0, 0, the output is also 0. So I write here 0. Next is 0, 1. So second combination is 0, 1. The output again 0. So I write here 0. Next is 1, 0. Again there is one low input. So output will be 0. Next is 1, 1. Both of the inputs are high. Here is last combination that when both of the inputs are high, the output will be high. So I write here 1. Here again 1, 0 and 0. So I write 0, 0 and 1. Here 1 is low input, so it will be 0. Next is 1, 0. Here 0 is again low, so it will be 0. Last one is 1, 1. So both of the inputs are high, so the output will be high. It is equal to 1. Now going back, it is A dot B. It means that A and B. Now the output A and B and input C combines by OR gate to give the output X. So first of all, I complete this table for OR gate. It is written as A or B. In the OR gate, if any one of the input is high, the output will be high. If both of the inputs are low, the output will be low. Here in the first combination, both of the inputs are low, the output will be low. Second combination, here is 1 low and 1 high input. So the output in this case will be equal to 1. Because in the OR gate, if any one of the input is high, the output will be high. In the third combination, again there is 1 high input, so output will be high. And last one combination is 1, 1, so it will be high because both of the inputs are high. I complete the table by using this. Now here I have considered C and A and B. So first combination is 0, 0. So here 0 and 0 and 0. Both of the inputs are low, the output will be low. So I write here 0. Second one is again 0, 0, so it will be 0. Third one again 0, 0, it will be 0. Next is 0, 1. So here, when the input is 0 and 1, the output is 1. So I write here output 1. Next one is again 1 and 0, so it will be 1. Next is also 1. Again here is 1. And last one, when both of the inputs are high, the output will be high. So here is also 1. So we have completed the truth table according to given circuit. Question number 10, part A. Figure 10.1 shows a wire that carries the current into the page. The circles on figure 10.1 shows the pattern of the magnetic field around the wire. In figure 10.1, we can see that there is a sign of grass. This sign shows actually the direction of the current is into the page, and the circles here shows the pattern of the magnetic field around the wire. Part 1. On figure 10.1, draw an arrow on each circle to show the direction of the magnetic field. So when the direction of the current is given and we have to find out the direction of the magnetic field, then we use right hand rule. I write here right hand rule. According to this rule, if you point your thumb in the direction of the current, then your curling fingers will show the direction of the magnetic field. I write here points out your thumb in direction of current, then curling finger curling fingers show the direction of magnetic field. So when I use right hand rule and points my thumb into the page, then my curling finger will be clockwise direction like this. So this is basically the direction of magnetic field. Next, part 2. State why the spacing of the circles increases as the distance from the wire increases. So in figure we can see that the spacing between the circle increases as its distance from the wire increases. So why this happens? We know that the magnetic field strength is inversely proportional to distance from the wire. When we increase the distance from the wire, then the strength of magnetic field decreases. The strength of magnetic field decrease, it means that the spacing between the circles increase. The magnetic lines are away from each other. The distance between them increase. It is because the magnetic field here is weaker. So I write here, when the distance from the wire increases, then the spacing between the circle increases. The magnetic field becomes weaker. As the distance from wire increases. Going towards the next part. Part B. Figure 10.2 shows an electric door lock. The slot in the door contains an unmagnetized iron bolt attached to a spring. The slot in the door frame is empty. This slot is surrounded by the coils of a solenoid. So here is the figure 10.2. We can see that there is a solenoid and also unmagnetized iron bolt that is attached with the spring. There is also the switch. In figure 10.2, the door is unlocked. The spring is not stretched. So when the door is unlocked, spring is not stretched. In figure 10.3, the door is locked and the spring is stretched. No. Here is the figure 10.3. We can see that when we lock the door, the spring is stretched. The bolt is initially in the position shown in figure 10.2. Describe and explain what happens when. Part 1. Switch S is closed. So what happens when the switch is closed? Going back to figure, we can see here that there is a switch. First of all, this switch is open. Now we close this switch. Then what will happen? The current flows through the circuit. The current also flows through the solenoid, and due to this flow of current, the solenoid gets magnetized. It means that solenoid has two poles, north pole and south pole. The poles appear due to the magnetization of the solenoid. We can see here that there is also the unmagnetized iron bolt. Due to the magnetization of the solenoid, this iron bolt also gets magnetized but with opposite polarity. So if I consider that here it is north, so here it will be south and north. In this way, the iron bolt also gets magnetized but in opposite polarity. So we can see here that this pole is south and this is north. Both of these opposite poles attract each other. Due to this attraction, the iron bolt moves towards the solenoid and door gets locked. The spring also stretch because when the door is locked, the spring stretch. So I write here, when current flows in solenoid, then it gets magnetized. The bolt also gets magnetized with opposite polarity. The unlike poles of solenoid and iron bolt attract each other due to which the bolt moves towards the solenoid and the door gets locked. The spring also stretches. Part 2. The switch S is reopened. Now what will happen when the switch S is reopened? Here we can again see the figure that 10.2 there is a switch and it is closed. Now we reopen this switch, then the current passing through the solenoid will be zero. There will be no current passing through the solenoid, due to which it gets demagnetized and it does not have any pole because it is demagnetized. Due to the demagnetization of the solenoid, there is no longer attraction between the solenoid and the iron bolt. Finally, the spring contracts and pulls the bolt back in this direction and takes it back to the original position. So I write here, when S is reopened, no current passes through solenoid and it gets demagnetized. There is no longer attraction between iron bolt and solenoid, due to which the spring contracts and pulls the bolt back. And takes it back to original position. Question number 11. The radioactive isotope bismuth-210, whose atomic number is 83 and the mass number is 210, decays by beta particle emission to an isotope of polonium, whose symbol is Po. Part A. Complete the nuclide equation that represents this decay. So we have to complete this equation. When the bismuth undergoes beta emission and it emits polonium. So I write here, in order to complete this equation, I have to balance the atomic number and atomic mass on both sides of this arrow. So first of all, we know that beta particles are just like electrons with atomic number -1 and mass number 0. So first of all, I write for the beta particle, here is -1 and here is 0. Now I check the atomic number and atomic mass on both sides of this equation. I write here atomic number. On the left hand side, atomic number is 83 and on right hand side it is -1, and I suppose that it is x and y. So I write here 83 is equal to x plus -1. So the value of x comes to be 83 plus 1, which is equal to 84. So the atomic number of polonium is 84. I write here 84. Now I have to check the mass number. It will be on the left hand side, mass number is 210, while on the right hand side it is 0 and y. So I write here 210 is equal to y plus 0, which means that y is equal to 210. So there will be no change in the mass number before and after decay. I write here 210. Part B. A radiation detector is placed on a bench in the laboratory where there are no artificial sources of radiation. The detector is switched on. In 7 1-minute period, the detector displays these readings. First of all 24, 22, 25, again 25, 21, 20 and 24. Part 1. Explain why in the absence of any artificial source, there are readings on the detector. Suggest one origin of this effect. So first of all, we don't have any radioactive sources or any artificial source. So why this reading appears? We have to describe the origin of these readings. So this is basically due to the background radiation from the environment. I write here background radiation from the environment. And these background radiations are actually obtained from rocks, ground, sun, air and radon, argon, etc. So the background radiations are obtained from rocks, air, sun, food, etc. Part 2. Explain why the readings obtained are not all the same. Because it's a random process, so the readings are not same. These are random. So I write here random process. Part 3. The half-life of bismuth 210 is 5.0 days. A sample of bismuth 210 is brought close to the detector and in 1 minute, the reading displayed is 487. The equipment is left in the same place for exactly 10 days. Predict the reading in 1 minute period at the end of this time. So first of all, when there is no radioactive source near the detector, so the readings are given these. First of all, I find out the average of these reading. I write here average is equal to, these are the average of the reading due to the background radiation. So it will be 24 plus 22, 25 plus 25 plus 21 plus 20 and 24, then divided by the total number of readings. So these are 7. I write here 7. So the value of average count comes to be 23. I write here average count due to background radiation is equal to 23. Next, it is given that the bismuth half-life is 5.0 days and we have to find out the equipment left in the same place for exactly 10 days. So, we have to find out that how much half-life pass. I write here number of half-life is equal to total time divided by half-life. Here total time is 10 days divided by half-life is 5.0 days. It means that 2 half-life passes. So first of all, reading is given when the source is bismuth 210. So it is 487. And I have to subtract the count that is due to background radiation. It will be 23. So it becomes 464. No, it is the reading and we have to calculate the reading when 2 half-life passes. So here I make a table. So first of all, in this table I write the count rate per minute and half-life. Count rate, that is in minutes, and half-life, which is in days. So originally there are 464 count when no half-life pass. So I write here 0. When first half-life pass, then half of this count rate remains half. It will be 464 divided by 2, which is equal to 232. So when first half-life pass, count rate will be 232. And when second half-life pass, half of this reading remain. So it will be 116. I write here second half-life passed and count rate will be 116. Also, I draw lines here. So it means that when 2 half-life passes, reading will be 116. I write here 116. Count per minute.